At the United Nations headquarters, a press briefing unfolded with a sense of anticipation. The spotlight was firmly on Secretary-General António Guterres, who is preparing for a high-stakes meeting with US President Donald Trump. For reporters, the upcoming encounter between the world's top multilateral diplomat and the leader of the most powerful nation raised urgent questions. What could this meeting achieve? Could it alter the dynamics of peace negotiations across the globe? The exchange began when Michelle Nichols, senior correspondent for Reuters, rose to ask her question. Her words cut directly to the heart of the matter. Michelle Nichols said, "You also hope to meet with President Trump next week for the first time since he returned to office in January. What do you hope to achieve during that meeting?" The Secretary-General's face tightened, a reflection of both the gravity of the question and the expectations that surround any dialogue with Washington. He took a measured pause before responding. António Guterres said, "Well, I would be delighted to meet President Trump, and the US is a central player in world affairs. There are many public positions that both of us have, but I do believe that there are areas where our efforts can be put together." This statement set the tone, diplomatic, respectful, but also pragmatic. It was a reminder that while differences between the UN and the US are well known, cooperation remains essential. Guterres then offered an example that illustrated his vision: peace mediation, one of the United Nations' most enduring missions. António Guterres said, "We talk about peace mediation. The UN has very strong efforts in peace mediation in different parts of the world, where we have people that know all the interlocutors, people that have wide experience of the economic, social, and other root causes and the human rights problems of the countries, that have a relationship of trust and confidence with some of the key actors. But we have no carrots and no sticks." With that single phrase, "no carrots and no sticks," the Secretary-General laid bare the UN's structural dilemma. The organization has credibility, neutrality, and networks of trust. Yet it lacks the material leverage to change behavior. It cannot offer aid packages or threaten sanctions. It cannot impose its will on warring parties. Guterres leaned into the point, broadening it to the current geopolitical context. António Guterres said, "And as we have no carrots and no sticks in a world in which we have the geopolitical divides that we have, it's extremely difficult to make the protagonists of the present conflicts understand the need to come to peace. Now the United States has carrots and sticks. So in some situations, if you are able to combine the two, I think we can have a very effective way to make sure that some peace process at least can lead to a successful result." It was an unmistakable appeal to partnership. The UN provides the mediation expertise, the moral authority, and the trust of conflicting parties. The United States brings economic incentives, sanctions, and military weight. Together, Guterres suggested, they could make a real difference in conflicts that today seem impossible to resolve. Nichols, pressing further, asked whether there were specific conflicts the Secretary-General had in mind. Guterres declined to be drawn into naming names. António Guterres said, "I mean, there are many situations around the world that are known, and in all of them, I think we should be open to find ways to join efforts." The room understood the delicacy of his response. Naming a conflict might have politicized the discussion or preempted the agenda of his meeting with Trump. But the implication was clear. From Ukraine to Gaza, from Sudan to Myanmar, there are crises where a UN-US partnership could prove decisive. The floor then shifted to another reporter, Beno, from the German press agency, who echoed a broader sentiment that peace is a shared objective between both sides, even if approaches differ. The heart of the Secretary-General's message lay in his admission, "We have no carrots and no sticks." This phrase crystallized decades of criticism about the United Nations. It is a forum for dialogue, a vehicle for humanitarian aid, and a mediator in conflicts. But it is not a superpower. The UN cannot compel governments to negotiate. It cannot unilaterally impose economic measures. Its peacekeeping forces, when deployed, rely on the contributions and consent of member states. In essence, the UN's power rests on persuasion, legitimacy, and collective will, assets that are fragile in today's polarized world. For Guterres, this acknowledgement was not weakness. It was strategic honesty. By stating openly that the UN lacks hard power, He framed the need for American cooperation not as charity, but as necessity. Equally striking was Guterres' framing of the United States. He emphasized that America possesses the very tools the UN lacks, the carrots of economic aid, trade incentives, and political recognition, and the sticks of sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and military might. By saying the United States has carrots and sticks, Guterres reminded the press, and perhaps Trump himself, that Washington's choices still reverberate across every global conflict. Yet, this framing comes with a challenge. President Trump has historically been skeptical of multilateralism, dismissing some international institutions as ineffective or even hostile to US interests. He has pushed for reform, criticized UN bureaucracy, and clashed with allies over funding commitments. For the Secretary-General, the task is delicate: to persuade Trump that working with the UN amplifies American influence rather than undermines it. Though Guterres avoided naming conflicts, the urgency of global crises hung heavy in the room. Observers pointed to several flashpoints where US-UN cooperation could be decisive. Ukraine. The war has destabilized Europe and tested NATO unity. While the US supplies weapons and sanctions Russia, the UN provides humanitarian relief and serves as a mediator for grain export deals and prisoner exchanges. A partnership could reinforce both tracks. Gaza and Israel. With renewed violence and failed ceasefire attempts, the UN's credibility in mediation remains vital, but only Washington has the leverage over Israel to influence outcomes. Sudan. Civil war continues to devastate the nation, creating famine and displacement. The UN has on-the-ground expertise but little power to enforce ceasefires. The US, with sanctions and diplomatic clout, could pressure warring factions. Myanmar. After the military coup, democratic institutions collapsed. While the UN calls for dialogue, Washington's sanctions remain one of the few external pressures on the junta. By declining to single out any of these conflicts, Guterres left space for diplomatic flexibility, but the stakes were evident. The looming question remains: how will President Trump respond? His administration's track record in his first term showed both confrontation and pragmatism. He criticized UN spending and questioned climate accords, yet also engaged with the UN on North Korea sanctions and humanitarian relief. Now, with his return to office, the stakes are higher. Will Trump see the UN as a useful partner in solving conflicts, or will he view it as an obstacle to America First policies? Guterres' approach suggests cautious optimism. By emphasizing shared goals, peace, stability, and conflict resolution, he hopes to frame cooperation not as ideological alignment, but as practical necessity. The press exchange ended without fireworks, but the implications were profound. António Guterres used the moment to lay the groundwork for his meeting with President Trump. His words conveyed a mix of humility and persuasion. The UN cannot act alone, but together with the US, it can turn stalemates into opportunities for peace. The Secretary-General's most striking appeal was crystal clear: now the United States has carrots and sticks. So in some situations, if you are able to combine the two, I think we can have a very effective way to make sure that some peace process, at least, can lead to a successful result. This is the pitch he will carry to Washington: not confrontation, but partnership; not ideology, but results. Whether Trump accepts the offer remains to be seen, but for now, the world watches as diplomacy prepares for its next act.